Hello again. This is Teresa, um, here to present the next unit for Lake Grove Elementary. Excuse me, Lake Grove Elementary Artlet, Wassily Kandinsky. So Wassily Kandinsky, pronounced that way, as on here, Wassily Kandinsky, was a Russian modern painter. He lived from 1866 to 1944. I don't have a slide in here right now about where he lived, but he didn't actually stay in Russia. He went to Germany for most of his career and then ended his career and his life in Paris, France. Um, Kandinsky is somebody that we may recognize some of the paintings for. The big thing here for the Kandinsky to explain to the kids is that Kandinsky really loved color. But we're going to start with this picture of him with a black and white photo for a couple of reasons. One of the things is, what do you notice? You can ask the kids what they notice about this painting. And even without the color, you can see there's a lot of shapes, there's a lot of lines. Also, it's really big. Kandinsky painted very large scale paintings. And so this is him sitting in front of it. He provides a lot of scale. You can talk about how big these paintings really are if you were to go see them in a museum. So without the color here, you can see that this is a painting full of shapes. You can ask the kids, is it realistic? And the answer is no, it is very abstract. Abstract art is the most important contribution made to art history in the 20th century. It didn't exist before that. We've studied lots of people so far who've been doing more figural painting, more realistic painting. Last year, we did do a couple of abstract painters like Mondrian. Wassily Kandinsky is a pivotal figure in abstract art. So we can talk a little bit about that depending on the level of student you're teaching. If it's a fifth grader, maybe they have a little more background in abstract art. If it's a kindergartner, obviously, just talk about the shapes and colors. So abstract art, to boil it all down, is just that Kandinsky did not paint what he saw. He painted what he felt inside himself, which is a little different from other abstract painters who may have started with something and then eventually abstracted it out. By the end of his career, Kandinsky was really just painting from feeling. But like most abstract painters, Kandinsky didn't start out painting just abstractly. He actually started painting figuratively here, as you can see. And the last unit was more so. This has a lot in common with that. It's a lot of big, heavy brush strokes, not quite the impasto style, but a little bit of it. Lots of texture. Actually, yes, up in the clouds there, you can see a lot of that. So in 1895, Kandinsky saw an exhibition of French Impressionist work in Moscow, and that inspired him to become a painter. And he especially was moved by Monet's work, including something called a work called Haystack. So his early paintings feature this impressionistic brush stroke, these like blobby things that we all practiced last month in the Morisot unit. So dabs of color to create loose shapes, brush strokes that imply movement. Here we have a horse, a man on a horse. But he uses a lot more vibrant colors than we saw in Morisot's work, which was a lot of whites and subtle pastels. These are very, very, very bright. You can kind of see that here, and a lot of depth with the black. So this piece is an excellent example of Kandinsky transitioning from figural painting into abstraction. And the subject's still recognizable here. You can ask the kids what they see. Just like the last painting, you can kind of detect some horses with horseback riders, but they're more angular. They're starting to become a little more about shape and a little less about how they actually exist in our field of view for real. The repetition of similar shapes and colors creates a regular rhythm of movement across the bottom of the canvas. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but rhythm is a big part of Kandinsky's work, partly because he also really incorporated music. Black lines and outlines emphasize those colors and shapes. And the big thing here is just compared to the last painting, the colors are handled in a really new way. You can ask the kids, are these realistic? Which colors here are realistic? If those are trees, the red and the yellow might actually be close to realistic, if a little bit out there with the different blending. But they do diverge from reality, especially around this blue mountain. And so you can ask the students also, the red, the blue, and the yellow, what do we call those colors? And the answer is that primary colors. Sorry, this is a British slide, so the colors are spelled incorrectly for the American audience here, but it's a really good illustration of the red, the yellow, and the blue coming together. And it's important. We're not going to teach a ton of color theory in this because there's not enough time, but you can kind of get the feel for it in a hands-on project that when you blend those colors together, you get any color. We're going to give the kids lots more colors to work with, but just something to keep in mind here that red, yellow, and blue are come up a lot in Kandinsky's work, partly because I think he's blending those colors together in order to get the palette that he wants. So Kandinsky was an accomplished musician. I mentioned we talk about music. He believed that colors in painting, like sounds in music, could evoke emotions. There's a part of this where if you want, if your teacher's up for it, you can play some music while they're doing the hands-on project and be inspired. But we aren't making that. That's a little logistically difficult for every class, so we're not making that a requirement. But you can kind of talk through the entire presentation with the idea of reminding students to like imagine music playing in their mind and how that makes them feel. So this painting's one that first took on that musical feel. The shapes don't really have their likeness in reality. The objects and the colors are placed as if they're notes on a page of music. They're kind of just, and you can imagine them being dabbed on there with a lot of kind of improvisation. So you can ask, what do you see here? And honestly, whatever the kids say is fine. You could see anything. For me, I see maybe a countryside, some trees are indicated at the bottom with those lines. There's maybe a lighthouse there, a forest. Any answer is fine. Another question you can follow up with here is, did he use any outlines? Because we saw in the past painting, he was doing some outlining. And no, he didn't really use outlines or black here. There's a lot of white space, but there's not necessarily that outlining effect that you'll see in later works or the last one. He's really making shapes with the colors and blending the colors. You can see the yellow and the green and the blue all come together to make new shades. So an optional question if you were into it is, how does this make you feel? Here's a very different painting. There's no clear subject matter in this painting. Unlike the last one, you can ask the kids what they see. They're probably going to throw out a bunch of random things. I don't know, scribbles, cells, who knows? But it's purely abstract. It's just color, shapes, and lines. But it still evokes emotion, maybe even music. So you can imagine, like, what do they hear when they look at this painting? What kind of music do they hear in their minds when they look at this painting? What does it make you feel? Kandinsky painted a number of works called compositions, and that kind of doubles down on this idea of the music. They're aimed to be painted like music, melodies with a dissonance and harmony like a song. He's kind of this one maybe trying to tell a story. In this one, he used certain colors to symbolize issues and emotions. So the same kind of way that if you think about a piece of music, there's certain instruments that might represent a mood. If you think about Peter and the Wolf, and you have like, Peter has a certain flute and the wolf has a certain bass or cello. Similar thing here. So he assigned colors to different aspects. In this one, he's using yellow to symbolize earthly matters, humans dealing with issues in their own daily lives, and then blue is representing spiritual things. Again, doesn't really matter exactly what he intended here. We can kind of talk through what we see and feel. It's not totally abstracted like the last one. You could probably pick out a story or some figures in this one and imagine what kind of story is being told. This is also a composition, so same series, where he's trying to arrange a painting like music with the principles of music. This one's fun. There's like a rainbow hidden in there. There's some other things going on. But what else do you notice about the colors in this painting? Yes, they're blended. They're all very bright. They're very there's a lot of movement. There's also all these big black lines, and these big black lines are giving some rhythm. They're giving some structure, but they're also just kind of giving some emotion, some like big energy. And all of that is fine. I think the hands-on project's real fun for the color theory part, so we're just going to fly through the rest of these examples. They're all very inspiring, but they're all very similar also probably to a student audience. Another music term from Kandinsky used for his words is improvisation. And so does anyone know what that means? Is something you could ask. And what he meant when Kandinsky said that is an unconscious expression of an inner impulse. And that's kind of what I was getting at, that Kandinsky is really big on feeling the art. So it's not about like looking at it and mapping it out and having it be super realistic or using proportions like Botticelli did. It's what you feel. So I think this is going to be a good thing to drive home with the kids. They probably feel art in a similar way. So painting what he felt in the moment is what improvisation meant to Kandinsky. So in this piece, what's the color you see? Warm, cool, a little bit of both. Are they mostly light, mostly dark? I'd say this is a lot of light, a lot of brightness in this painting. And then emotion, what's a word that describes your feeling and mood when you see this painting? Anything is fine. You can have them shout it out. If you're short on time, you can just maybe take a couple suggestions. Another question here that's deeper for maybe the older kids is, do you need to know what's going on in the painting for it to be considered art? Or is your expression and pure emotion enough? This is a good one to linger on a bit because this is related to our demo, our project at the end. So this is a color study. I say in the notes, it's just a color study. It's really meant to be a practice. You see how different it is from something like this. It's a practice piece, but it gets at the heart of what Kandinsky was doing with color theory, and how he approached color. So you can kind of see here, he's taking this circle shape, which he really used a lot of, and blending it, putting some solid colors up against other really solid colors to make sharp lines. And it really kind of evokes the way that different colors can have different meanings or cause different feelings to come up in the viewer. And so he believed the colors had specific meanings. Red was power and energy. Yellow, as I said, was earth. Blue was heaven or sky or something spiritual. Green was for peace. And black and white were silence and nothingness. These are obviously not emotions or concepts that lots of kids connect to. So we're going to convert this into more emotions around like happiness and kindness and friendliness. But good to kind of linger here and maybe talk about what people feel, how people feel when they look at different ones. So Kandinsky believed the combination of colors could produce vibrational frequencies similar to chords played on a piano. That's a big concept for kids, but you can kind of talk about how the colors in this painting seem to vibrate due to the way they're placed. So the yellow next to the red, if something's on that color wheel we looked at opposite, they're going to vibrate more. So the yellow and the purple, the blue and the orange, those spots really seem to vibrate or pop. Here is a later work, so we're going to transition now to some of his later stuff where it's just a little less organic. You notice you can ask the kids, how is this different from the things we've looked at? And there's obvious answers here, I think, around geometric lines and shapes, empty white space or negative space, and smoother colors and blending are in use. So a little more planning maybe in this, and like the emotion is a little more contained, but it's still very abstract. It is not at all easy to parse what the subject of this matter of this painting is. So how is it similar though to the last one? Well, some of the things that are similar in his throughout all his work are the feeling of rhythm and movement, the bright colors, and those bold black lines that are just getting a little less organic here. And by this point, Kandinsky was producing entirely abstract paintings like we saw just now in this one too. There's really very little way you can say, oh, this is a picture of a person or a horse. No clear subject or scene. So a fun fact here, again, to tie back to music, is that Kandinsky claimed he saw music when he saw color. Color is the keyboard and the eyes are the harmonies, he said, and the soul is the piano with many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key or another to cause vibrations in the soul. So you can see he was very spiritually and emotionally invested in his artwork. But just translating that back for the kids that like, when you think about music, when you play music, do you see color? It's totally okay if you don't. I think it's a special condition for some folks, but it is interesting to think about that as an inspiration for your art. So what kind of music do you hear when you see this painting and these colors is a way to reverse that back to the kids. And you can ask the same thing of this, which is using a whole different color palette. If this is cool colors and very, very much those primary colors, this is getting into more of those secondary colors, the oranges and the purples. Kandinsky also theorized that shape expresses emotion. So we've talked about color expressing emotion, but he also thought shape expressed emotion, and especially the circle. He said, a circle, which I use so often, could not be called otherwise but romantic. Again, a lofty quote for a bunch of kids, but I think it's fun to think about the shapes and how they affect people. So what shapes do you see in this painting and how do they make you feel? Here's the circle again. You see he used the circle a lot because he thought it was a romantic shape. This is during his Bauhaus years in Germany. He painted 10 paintings where the only shape he used was a circle. This is one of just a couple that we're going to look at in this presentation. Just a couple more slides here. So when the Nazis rose to power in Germany in the 1930s, Kandinsky left Germany and went to Paris in France in 1933. And while he was there, we heard earlier that his earlier career was influenced by Impressionist art. While he was in Paris, he was influenced by Surrealist art. And Surrealist art, we haven't done a lesson on yet. I think it's coming next year, maybe, as a unit. But surrealism is that idea of kind of imagined very wonky landscapes. Think about Dolly and like bioorganic shapes and kind of squishy shapes. So he used some of that here. You can see that here, that he's using those to embellish his works. And the work is a lot more dreamlike, which is a hallmark of surrealist work. There's also an evolution in the color and the shapes here, right? Not only the shapes, these different kind of organic blobs, but that have crisp edges. He's also using a lot more pastels, which happened a lot more in the surrealist works. The last one, you can ask the students if you can find just two purely organic shapes in this painting. This is kind of like a hide and seek painting. Most of the shapes in this, if you don't notice, are actually these weird blobby shapes, the surrealist kind of dreamlike shapes. But there are two hidden shapes in here. I actually think you could argue there's three because of the triangle, but the circle and the square are the two that are sort of hidden throughout in very, very small spaces. The hint is in the title. So that's the end of the lesson. We'll get into the hands-on next. I'm going to record it as a separate one so it's easier to consume, but the hands-on project will be the color study in oil pastels.